All right, folks, welcome back to GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We've been doing this a number of weeks now. I think we're like week 9 or 10 now. We've been doing this every week because there's just so much news and no one can keep up with it all. And we have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about ChatGPT Bans, ChatGPT versus iPhone adoption, Bloomberg GPT. So a lot of GPT up front. People like that, but there's a lot of activity there. Deepfake Provenance. We have a special guest to talk about that right here. We'll talk to her in just a second. Meta segment analysis. What a cool product that is. Bing check, its ads, a lot more. We're going to get through as much as we can in 35 to 40 minutes. Really excited to be back here because we always have fun every week doing this. Now, Nina Schick, thanks for joining us. The author of Deepfakes way back in 2020, before this was such a huge idea and topic.
Oh, so good to be here. Your newsletter is amazing, and I'm glad to be part of the discussion. Yeah, been following this space like you for quite a few years. And just before we came online, we were just commenting on our reflections. And one of my reflections has just been how much bigger this has become. Even though we knew in the very beginning it was a big deal,
Yes.
Now it seems like the ultimate profound question. I actually think it's an inflection point for humanity. So that's where we got to from deepfakes.
Okay, well, that's, an inflection point for humanity. It's like, oh, we can just move on then. Like, not very important. And my esteemed colleague, Eric Schwartz. Thanks for joining me today, Eric.
Yeah, excited to have Nina here and excited to talk about so many things today.
Okay, well, let's get right into it. I know people are still organizing and joining on LinkedIn and YouTube. But hey, the news doesn't stop, so we're not going to stop either. So our first story is breaking news. Canada opens ChatGPT investigation, but we could actually go back to Italy bans GPT, and there's a lot of different layers of this. I'll give sort of the rundown. I think everybody knows about this. Italy came out, said, hey, you guys had a security breach, OpenAI. We want you to stop ChatGPT, and we're opening an investigation based on GDPR violations. And then Canada came out and said, hey, we think we should look at this too. And then Germany said, well, we might look at it. And France said, hey, we just got 2 complaints. We're going to look at it. Ireland said, we don't want to be left out. So the train has left the station. What do you think, Nina Schick?
So interesting, isn't it? How within a matter, ChatGPT is like 4 months old. So not only is it the fastest adopted technology of all time, how quickly it's entered the public arena for regulators to start looking at for all these questions around data protection and privacy. And boom, 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 all of these investigations and bans now starting. I think it's only the beginning. Also really interesting to note that most of them are European countries, right? Haven't seen
Canada's basically a European country too.
Yeah, right? It's Canada's like
just think of Montreal.
Exactly. It's European. Come on.
It's European light.
Exactly. So it is interesting because if these bans kind of stay in place in Europe, there's an argument to be made. Oh, is this going to become like the part of the world that's going to be left behind? Because this technology it's hard to see how you can compete with an organization, an individual, a nation state that has access to generative AI models and systems, and you're basically shutting it down. You're going to be playing checkers and they're going to be playing 3D chess. So fascinating, but also very legitimate worries. I actually wondered with ChatGPT why there hadn't been any kind of debate about the training data. So this seems to be right? We saw it with Midjourney. We see it, with Stable Diffusion, less so with some of the closed models. But I was like, interesting that nobody mentioned this in the context of ChatGPT. Well, that's happened now.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. What do you think, Eric?
I certainly agree. And I think it's the issue of, or the question of where these investigations are coming from. It's not surprising it's Europe. Europe passed GDPR. They have just a relatively higher level of scrutiny for things involving data privacy and certainly identity theft issues like that. And to be honest, I would not be surprised if these investigations are as much about trying to figure out the questions to ask as they are about coming up with policy solutions, because the response is because of what happened with ChatGPT, with the data breach, with the potential for people seeing the titles of conversations that other people are having with ChatGPT. and it's a response to something that happened rather than a proactive search for regulatory solutions. So I think that it's going to be a lot of scrambling and a lot of trying to figure out what needs to be done before trying to understand what should be done, I guess, at this point.
It's such a good point, Eric. And a quick shout out, Michael Novak, Janice Mandel, Emily Troutner for joining us on LinkedIn. If you guys are here, just drop a little note, let everyone know you're here, but also questions, comments. We'd love to hear what everyone here thinks about what's going on with the new regulatory push around particularly ChatGPT. This is not around large language models. Regulators don't target topics so much, particularly when they're early. They target companies, particularly high profile companies. And I think the key thing for me when I look at something like this is once you cross that line, and this is what I wrote about actually with the security breach. I said, oh, wow, you just potentially gave regulators a pretext to look at everything. So now what we're going to see is those questions, as they try to figure out the questions, they're going to, well, we need to look at the data, or we don't know what questions are good. So we need to ask all the questions. This is going to be a very painful lesson for the OpenAI folks to learn. How brilliant their timing was to sell themselves to Microsoft before this stuff all came up, because it would be hard. The risk uncertainty would really undermine them right now. But, frankly, they're going to have to answer a lot of uncomfortable questions. And this, I think it'll get resolved because it's such a popular solution, but it's going to set this precedent for people starting to want to get them to comply with things that are really outside of what is practical for them to do.
Yeah, I would also say at least slight silver lining for them is that it's regulatory agencies in Europe looking at them, which means it's people who may not be experts in this particular subject, but who have some background in technical in technology and in how to regulate technology in general, rather than having to do a hearing in front of elected politicians who may be starting from a very different point of understanding what ChatGPT is, or even how the technology functions, or what the issues are, because that's a whole other ballgame.
Well, and you also, Eric, you mentioned scrambling, and scrambling it is. Like, EU has been discussing its AI Act for a very long time. And until fairly recently, the draft didn't even make mention of generative AI. As far as I understand it, they're scrambling and redrafting and trying to put generative AI into that text right now. But I have a history of working with policymakers and politicians on tech. And tech is just so exponential before you even put generative AI into the equation that it is really difficult sometimes for them. Just by design, what they do is reactive. They're on the back foot. So trying to understand what's happening now, the pace at which it's accelerating. And Brett, I think you're spot on. You target specific companies and those who have put their head high above the parapet. The first one was obviously Stability AI, right? Which the open source release of Stable Diffusion immediately bang, bang, bang.
Right.
And now OpenAI also very much kind of in the target, shall we say, with the success of ChatGPT. I couldn't agree with you more. How smart of them, how timely to get that investment of Microsoft, which just gives them, kind of makes them almost a little bit bulletproof, given how many people are already using ChatGPT and many of the applications being developed by OpenAI.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different things here. So Mikkel was talking about it. Hey, this came after plugins, and my headline around plugins was, oh, OpenAI just declared war on everyone, because up until that point, they were an API. They were just a back-end service, like all the application providers who deal with consumers and consumer privacy issues. They were the ones who were potentially in the line of fire, but they weren't the big deal. ChatGPT, like a lot of focus, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, we have plugins. Oh, if you're building an ecosystem, you're going to be a consumer app. Like, this is no longer a demonstration product. And I think that's like a really interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up, Mikkel. It was a research interface, and now all of a sudden people are looking at it. And this is the other thing. Once you go into a consumer app, like your security attack surface, your security vulnerabilities are just different. And if you don't know what that is, you're going to have some stumbles. And that's what led us to this. But let's actually transition to a different point. Let's see if I can share this new tab, because I think you hit on it, Nina. Like, this wouldn't matter if we didn't have this type of hockey stick growth from ChatGPT. So what we see right here, for folks who are watching, is that red line is Google searches worldwide in the US for ChatGPT, and then OpenAI. And so nobody cared about either of these companies just a little while ago. But then all of a sudden they're on the radar, and regulators then get asked questions sometimes that are uncomfortable, like, what are you doing about this? Is there an issue? Should we be worried about this? And just to give people some perspective, I did some analysis last weekend where I compared this to Amazon Alexa, right? That's a pretty popular solution, right? Oh, it doesn't even rate. And then, well, let's get more interesting. We say, okay, so Amazon Alexa, pretty popular. I mean, actually super popular, probably the most popular consumer product that came out in the last couple of years. Let's look at the gold standard. That green line is the iPhone. Okay, so ChatGPT, kind of small compared to the iPhone, right? But still bigger than all of these other things that we've seen. And if we go down a little bit further, we can start to look at this compared to some enterprise applications like Canva and Slack. So ChatGPT, a third of the way to the iPhone, not to its peak. It's like about 1/9 of what the iPhone peak is. But just blowing everything that's not iPhone out of the water in terms of consumer interest.
Yeah, I think, and didn't you just cite a study in the newsletter just, I think, 2 days ago, which showed that, I think it was in the US, was it 83 or was it even 80% of consumers had some kind of idea what generative AI was?
Yeah, I think that number's I think that's a hot sample, but yes, I put that in there because we don't have good adoption data. We don't have good awareness data. Search was a good proxy, but yes. So it is over, they put it over 80, but it's it's only people who are online, and it's a little bit of a tech adopters, but it still means I can say unequivocally over half of US consumers know what this is. That's astounding.
And who's fueled that? What's fueled that? It's been ChatGPT. I mean, we've been in the space for a while. We know how it's been accelerating. And yeah, a larger kind of community got interested in DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, but it was ChatGPT was catching bottled lightning, right? There has been nothing that's done more for AI or generative AI's brand awareness than ChatGPT. And the numbers back it up, right? 5 days to 1 million users, 2 months to 100 million users. Nothing beats that. The next closest thing is TikTok, I think, and TikTok was even 10 months. And we know that anecdotally. I mean, I was just at a conference in DC of 5,000 privacy professionals, and did by show of hands who's heard of ChatGPT, and every single hand in the house went up. And not only did they all know it and had used it, but they were discussing it in a work context. What does this mean for the future of my business? I can't think of anything else that has had that kind of impact in such a short time. 4 months old.
I know. It's amazing. What do you think, Eric?
No, I mean, I absolutely agree. But I think it's telling from that anecdote that it is one of those rare technologies where it blurs the line between enterprise and consumer technology immediately and decisively in a way that you could be in your office and your manager says, "Oh, we're playing around with this to write marketing emails," and then you go home and you're playing around with it to come up with some emails, or you wanted to see, you just want to play with it, and you can, and you want to be productive with it, and you can, and it's even though it's not at a point where you just trust everything it comes out with, and certainly it's not something that you're going to ideally be blindly using without ever checking its output, but for most people who have become used to a certain level of engagement with technology, with an understanding of what this kind of, if they use these voice assistants, they understand broadly what they can do and where they're lacking. And suddenly ChatGPT seems, even to people who know this kind of technology, it seems to be doing a lot more if not quite what it may
It's
claim
so
it can do.
practical. I mean, it's like and people are just discussing it. I mean, I just had Mudu Sudhakar on the podcast that'll come out in video tomorrow as well. But he was like, it's changed my life. It's like my interaction with their kids while they were at school and what they're using it for. He said, I introduced it to my parents, in addition to like they've built a generative AI feature set into their core conversational AI, enterprise conversational AI solution. So, it's just so useful. And I kind of feel like, like what Janice just said around the iPhone, we were making calls and checking email. And then it's just like, because it was there in front of us, we're like, oh, could it do this? Could it do that? It just opened up all these ideas about how we could leverage the technology, this new technology that we'd never had before.
Yeah. I mean, people are playing text versions of Pokemon games on it now. It's like, the iterations and possibilities within every single human activity are pretty wild.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. ChatGPT, a phenomenon. I guess we're not breaking new ground there. Not the first people to actually say that. Here is something interesting. I want to bring this up. It's been overshadowed by some of the other sort of really big news this week. But Bloomberg GPT, I think, is really interesting. So a 50 billion parameter large language model. So that's one of the key data points people have when they usually talk about large language models. So you think about GPT-3, 175 billion. GPT-4, the information is not released, probably something close to 1 trillion. If we look at Nemo, I think from actually Paul Cutzinger is on here. He could probably tell us, but I think it's 500 billion or something like that. So that's like, it's just like one thing. It's like how many different types of concepts can the or has the large language model organized or identified. But then the other thing about this is like it's a really large data set as well, which I think is interesting because like how many tokens you've trained on also speaks to how this is. And in particular, what Bloomberg said is they said, hey, I can have a smaller parameter model and I can do the general training for all these like general type of the pile and all these other data sets. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go really deep on financial data. And this brings us to this idea of domain-specific large language models or domain-specific applications. We know this, so people in here in the conversational AI industry know this really well. But I just feel like we're at the tip of this. This is going to be much bigger.
I couldn't agree with you more. And, entire industries are going to be disrupted by this kind of foundational technology. You see it with Bloomberg GPT for financial data. We've had so many conversations with people kind of building similar kind of large language models for different industries like law, for instance. I was just speaking to the co-founder of Tome, which is a basically LLM driven business which just does contracts for VCs. And their data their models are just trained on VC contracts. So kind of taking narrow verticals and then applying large language models to it, astonishing. And of course with Bloomberg, the kind of data that they must have access to, that they've trained their chat GPT on, its outputs, I would imagine, are really quite interesting. And probably where else can you get that type of insight? Because presumably some of this data is proprietary.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So.
Oh, and I'll throw one other thing here. We'll let Eric get in here. But here's the one thing I will say. So I'm a big believer in domain-specific models.
Yeah.
They're going to be great. Oh, and Paul Cutzinger just said, yeah, Nemo's 530 billion parameters. So that's big. So that's the NVIDIA foundation model. But look at this table that Bloomberg published. I kind of feel like they weren't thinking very clearly. So they've got Bloomberg GPT. It's got this performance benefit over GPT Neo X, an open source model, OBT 66 billion, and then the Bloomberg 17.6 billion, and then on general purpose, it goes all the way to GPT-3. What? GPT 3.5, GPT-4. This is what I call choosing your competitor to make your table look good.
Yeah, it's a little bit political, isn't it? Everybody wants to be showing how they've got the best ChatGPT or version of ChatGPT, which is so interesting because I think just in general, a broader observation, and it'd be interesting to see if you agree with this, is that I think this has kind of taken even the people or the companies who are at the very heart of this revolution a little bit by surprise. Because they knew they were building something cool and that it would have a lot of meaning, but I don't think they had even an idea in hell about how popular it would be, how quickly the ecosystem would explode, how much investment there would be, starting with OpenAI, then going to kind of like the big tech companies themselves who've all pivoted rather dramatically in the last few weeks, and then going all the way to like now everybody like Bloomberg, who's like, oh, we are building our own version of ChatGPT. We've been pioneering LLMs. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. It's so hot right now.
I mean, I agree. I think, Michael Novick's comment about BioGPT and his comment about that he's not convinced that larger is better. I think that's true. I think better curation of data and better training is definitely more important. I do think one thing that is particularly interesting to me for Bloomberg's purposes is the idea that it will not only help you with, or answer financial questions, but that it will translate your requests into Bloomberg's special language that it uses for its machines. I mean, those machines are really expensive. So if you have a tool that can help more people in your office use those machines in productive ways, that's already a great idea. On the other hand, I was reading about the sentiment analysis aspect of it, and I think we've all seen problems when the investors start to use emotion as an investment tool, or when there's a momentary panic, as with speaking of generative AI, with when Google Bard made that mistake and it seemed to wipe out 10% of Google's value. The idea that you're trusting an AI to understand and extrapolate from humans. From human interactions to understand how people will feel about a company in the coming weeks and months is a little scary. Yes. But I do think the translation aspect is something that's going to be really appealing to companies that own a Bloomberg machine.
And we know that these models are fallible and they're limited and they hallucinate. So I forget what output was it, like a tech output which started using ChatGPT to write financial articles, and they got called out because it was making mistakes. Yep. So you're absolutely right. When you're like a Bloomberg and you're getting sentiment analysis, which could potentially move markets, and you're just like, and the additional, so not only do they get things wrong, but the interesting, some studies seeming to show that when people interact with these models, they actually are more confident in the results than if it hadn't been created by artificial intelligence. I think I saw a study to that effect with AI generated code, that developers were actually more confident that their code had less vulnerabilities. So does that more broadly apply to all kind of AI generated outputs, including with text, that people just become, trust the machine, when they still obviously need human oversight?
Well, there's a concept called cognitive trust. So we have affective trust, which is basically emotional trust. We relate to something, and this is what we're going to talk about: deepfakes and virtual humans in a minute. And that's one of the barriers is going to be really hard to get past because they just don't have that emotive quality of humans. But you saw this with Alexa and Google Assistant and Siri. They tried to give them personality. They're trying to build that affective trust. Where they always had trouble, or usually were called out, is when they failed on cognitive trust. They didn't actually complete the task efficiently or correctly, and that's one of the things that ChatGPT or any of these things need to do. Now, if they start to, if they're wrong a lot, people will learn. They're like, I can't trust it for this type of thing, or I can't trust it for anything, depending on how they think about it. If they're right most of the time, they will. But I think when I look at this space, it's like mobility, like mobile phones, not even smartphones. If it allows you to do things you couldn't do before, you'll still use it despite the warts.
I agree.
All right. All right, so let's move on to this. So Nina, you get to be on the screen twice.
Hey.
All right.
Which one's
So
the real me?
I want to play this. It's only a minute. So people who are watching live, just please confirm with me that you can hear the audio once I start it.
Some say that truth is a reflection of our reality. We are used to defining it with our very own senses. But what if our reality is changing? What if we can no longer rely on our senses to determine the authenticity of what we see and hear? We're at the dawn of artificial intelligence, and already the lines between real and fiction are becoming blurred. A world where shadows are mistaken for the real thing. And sometimes we need to radically change our perspective to see the things the way they really are.
Okay, very dramatic with the pull out there. I like it. A couple things. You may have recognized the person in that video. I do want to point out this little call out in the upper right-hand corner. There's a little I for information. You click that and there's information here. Nina, what is that telling us?
So it is the first authenticated AI generated video. And what this is a cryptographic hash showing basically the context of how this content was made. And this is not a watermark. It's really important to distinguish that what you see here is much more than a watermark. The cryptographic hash, which is actually from Truepic, a company that I advise, is designed to be interoperable across the internet with the open standard being developed by the C2PA. So this is about baking into the architecture of the internet, the actual infrastructure for content authenticity and media provenance. And it isn't only about cryptographically hashing authentic content, but given that synthetic content is about to inundate the information ecosystem, it's about doing the same for AI-generated content too. So it's the first kind of cryptographically hashed piece of AI-generated media that is interoperable across the internet and adheres to the open standard that we hope is going to be adopted by platforms, by generative AI companies. So it's really a call to action about being able to have as transparency as the medium for digital trust going forward. Otherwise, yeah, we kind of believe that it's existential if you can't trust anything that you see online.
Right. So, and I should just clarify, that was not Nina. That was a deep fake, or actually in this case, it was an artificially rendered virtual human type of that. And then at the end they pull out and that's you, correct? The last.
No, it's an actress. So it's like a face. So that's not me. It's like AI generated. And there was like an actress who was actually doing
I got it. And so then they just deep faked over you. And then the cryptographic hash then validated when it was created, who it was created by, and it's been signed. And that it also, there was the tag that said it has AI content.
Correct.
Okay, great. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an impressive video. I do think it's interesting, the distinction you're making with a watermark, because you're correct. Obviously, it's not a watermark. I almost wonder, generative AI is going to have to come up with its own language as well to describe how it functions. But I like the concept of it being transparent. The idea that it is going to be it's not going to hide its origins. But I mean, I do think it's going to be a race between better and better deepfakes and better authentication systems, as with all these kinds of technologies. We've seen attempts to do similar sort of authentication with synthetic voices, and obviously that's going to be important for these kinds of videos. But it does. I think it's a moment of legitimizing this kind of technology, where it's no longer going to always be a question of like, oh, is this real? Is the Pope wearing that jacket or not? It's going to be, oh, did this have the little sign saying that it's definitely a deep fake, or is this going to be from a less reputable source?
Yeah, it's kind of like flipping the equation on its head, because when I first started working in the space, my background is like in geopolitics and disinformation. Everybody was like, we need to develop the AI content detector. Now, as you know, turns out that's very difficult to do because AI detectors are never going to be 100% accurate. You can't build a one-size-fits-all detection model. And even if you did, let's say hypothetically, you could build a detector that could detect all pieces of AI-generated content. Well, that's going to be a fool's errand, given that the majority of AI-generated content isn't going to be malicious. I actually think AI-generated content is going to become, or AI will play a major role in the production of most digital content going forward. So you're basically detecting everything online. I mean, that doesn't serve any purpose. Not to mention that the jury's out as to whether a detector will always be able to detect AI generated content, because it's quite possible that the generators are just going to get so good that it'll just be impossible to detect within the DNA of content if it's generated by AI. So given all those problems, we still think detection is an important kind of field to develop going forward.
Sure.
But it's more about, if you're a good actor and you've got nothing to hide, then why are you not transparent about the origins of your content, whether or not it's generated by artificial intelligence?
Absolutely.
And I actually think that it's vital for the ecosystem going forward, because not only from a political perspective, but from a business perspective, if you can't validate or certify the information that you need to do your day-to-day business, then how are you going to operate? So as consumers and businesses start understanding the importance of provenance tech going forward, I think this has to become a vital kind of layer, shall we say, of the online ecosystem.
Yeah, I like it. And there's a question here from Paul. Loves the hash. Does it persist with simple edits like cuts, crops, mirrors, etc.? So do you have to re-sign it? How does it work?
No. So the reason why the cryptographic hash is so compelling is it's kind of baked into the DNA of that content. It always stays with that content. But the next step then is to widely adopt the open standards. You can always see it. So it's always there with the content, but you need to have the infrastructure in place too, so that you can actually always view it. So that's the kind of the hardest part, shall we say. We've already got the technology that can sign the content, whether it's made by AI or not. But the next step is widespread adoption of the infrastructure, so that you as a consumer, whether you're on your browser or whether you're on Facebook on your phone or on Instagram, you can see the context of that content. And ultimately, it's about transparency and not being in the business of adjudicating truth. So it's not somebody saying, hey, you get a verified tick mark, or this is false, or this is true. It's about giving people context so they can make their own trust decisions.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we should add to this conversation, and Eric, maybe you can talk us through this a little bit around the news from Metaphysic, because this takes a completely different angle to the same technology, but also an important point that's coming up.
Yeah, it sort of ties back into what we've been talking about before in terms of policy and regulation, because we've already seen that the copyright and trademark offices in the U.S. are not going to allow AI created content to be copyrighted or to have a trademark attached to it, but going beyond just the purely AI generated content. Now Metaphysic, which famously was on America's Got Talent, making Deepfake Elvis and so on. The CEO of Metaphysic is now attempting to copyright essentially his own virtual avatar, his own AI self. The idea being that if he can set this precedent for intellectual property rights with AI created content about himself, then it would make it a lot easier going forward for content creators, especially in entertainment, but elsewhere too, to be able to sell their likeness as an AI character the way they sell their likeness as an image or video.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think this is really interesting because Nina, you just brought up detection, very important. You were focused on authentication and transparency. We also have detection, but we have this idea of protection as well. So now Revel AI created this virtual human of you. So then the question is, and I'm sure you signed something that protects you or something like that. But for example, you've done a lot of videos. I've done a lot of videos. A lot of people they might even just be like personal videos that showed up on Facebook. There's a lot of data out there around us. So what protections do we have about our image likeness and how that can be used? And I think it's really clever. Metaphysic, always very clever about getting publicity. I think it's very clever to do this because I think it's also important that there is a way that maybe we can use existing laws to start to create a legal framework to protect people against the misuse of some of these technologies.
And it seems like such low-hanging fruit, right? That the principle that you should have control or ownership of your digital likeness in an era where AI can clone anybody in their digital kind of incarnation seems to me such an easy win. So I find this case really interesting because, first of all, it raises for the first time the notion that you can own your digital avatar, your digital representation, which I think is obviously makes sense. But also it goes back again to the idea of provenance tech, because if it's possible for anyone to create a digital version of you, you want to then authenticate the real digital version of yourself. So you can show, hey, this is my legitimate avatar, and that thing you see over there, that's not legitimate. So again, the idea of provenance tech goes to ownership as well. And finally, with the Copyright Office, I mean, Eric, you just mentioned it. I think were you referring to the ruling? Was it with like Zarya of the Dawn, the comic, where they said
there's that, and there's a related one, but the Zarya one's the big one,
right, where it said that AI generated content is not subject to IP or copyright. I mean, to me, that is astonishing. And I bet you they're going to have to revise that decision, given, again, my idea that AI is going to be almost the production engine for most of the information and content we see online. The fact, if you set the precedent that none of that is copyrightable, I don't think that's in line with what's going to happen.
Well, there's also the question whether copyright is going to be the right law for this. And Michael talked about this idea just in the comments, that Congress may need to change the law. Although I think when you think about individuals, there are a different set of protections in the law than other types of content that you might generate. So at the very least, I feel like the action by Tom in this space is going to get people talking about it. And if the patent office says, no, we can't do anything about this, then that's the impetus to build on top of it with new laws or adjustments to the regs.
I should say, by the way, I forgot they had the original announcement had been misstated. It's not just that they submitted. Actually, he successfully registered his copyright. So it could be revoked later on. It could face other issues. But at the moment, he does have the copyright on it.
So he's got the registration but I think that registration is it just for that version of him? That
he was granted the copyright for what they described as a hyper-realistic AI version of himself, because it's an accurate representation. So it's a question of like if there's any attempt to contest it somewhere, or if regulators put out new rules, or if lawmakers pass new laws, then that could be an issue. So theoretically, at the moment, he could license out his AI self and make money from it the way he would license out.
And he could also take action against someone who might be using some different version of it.
Yes, which is going to be a much bigger issue, as Emily Troutner points out. It's not just about the people who are alive; it's all the people who've already passed away.
It's true.
So if anyone deepfaked him right now, he would have legal grounds on like a copyright infringement.
Yeah, as I understand with copyright, I mean, especially this kind of copyright, he would have to prove that they were using it, like selling it, as opposed to like theoretically somebody could use it as a parody and claim it's a part of a parody thing.
So hypothetically, everybody who's been in non-consensual AI generated pornography could now say that.
Yeah, well, that's the other question is like, if he owns it, if he owns his AI self, does he only own the AI self created by Metaphysic as opposed to other engines, or does he own the ones that are using maybe even the same engine but are trained differently. It's going to be a lot. It's a good thing there's generative AI for lawyers to write contracts, because there's going to be a lot of new contract law coming out.
Lawyers going to be busy, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like whether it's retrospective or not is going to be a really important thing, because someone could come out and create an AI version of you now. You could go and register it, but if they already have basically pre-existing art on this, they might actually be grandfathered in so that nobody else can do this. You can take action against them, but they've already done this ahead of time, depending on what the laws are. So I think, Michael Novak's been talking about this. I think we're going to need some new legal frameworks, but I think it's really interesting that some of the existing laws can probably be applied today to provide some protections and push this forward.
Yeah, just to point out that the idea of AI generated art being copyrightable is one thing, but as somebody pointed out, the AI generated inventions and ideas, that's going to be a whole other issue.
All right, so let's move on to our next one. So we're going to get out of the deepfake world. That's been really fun, and Nina, thanks for providing that video for us. That was fun to look at that in real time. Let's go back to Bing. We haven't talked about Bing in a couple of weeks. Search, hey, they have ads. Microsoft actually mentioned this in the Q&A after the announcement of the new Bing, or BingGPT, Bing with GPT-4, whatever you want to call it, Bing Chat. But they have ads, and that's one of the ways that they are going to monetize. And what you can see is actually, this is a screenshot from Bing Chat, my version of it. I actually just typed something in. I asked about a certain type of trail running shoe, and it gave me this little carousel here, which is exactly the type of thing you see in the Bing results or the Google results, because it tries to push that e-commerce stuff on you. And then, here's another example from Jürgen Gravestein. He asked about chocolate, same type of thing. So it's not just me. I'm not the only one that's so lucky to be getting ads. A number of the early users of this are getting them. And then there was, and if you look at this, I also have a picture. This is what the Bing ad looks like. So it's very similar. One difference is in Bing Chat, it gives you the answer first, and then it shows you the ads. And then below that, it actually gives you the links, the source links to whatever the answer was. So a little bit different here. It gives you ads first because, hey, what's more important than the ads? And then we can move down here, and I'll just this will be the last point. We did see a blog post this week from the corporate vice president at Microsoft, who oversees these products, and he's showing some of these ways that media, like when you have those links, the source links at the bottom, how they might have these little hoverovers that give more context and make it more interesting maybe to click through. Of course, those could also be for ads, which I can guarantee is going to happen.
I'm genuinely wondering, this is fine if you're doing searching for something, but what if you're using the conversational Bing AI and you want it to do something more creative? Like, say you ask it to write a bedtime story for your kid, and for some reason the princess sure does seem to enjoy her Hershey's chocolate milk in the story. I wonder where those lines are going to be crossed, where the creative aspect of it and the commerce aspect of it overlap in ways that are not necessarily pleasant.
I couldn't agree more. And it's so interesting because when the idea of generative search was kind of being touted as this new way that would give far more utility to people to find exactly the information that they needed to, it's almost like being squared off against traditional search as oh, this is a terrible, this is just to target you for ads. And here we have this new vision of generative search, which is going to be so useful to you. And how long has it taken for it to become basically just a souped up, even more personalized, hyper personalized kind of commercial thing that gets you to buy and gives you ads? I mean, of course, it was inevitable, right? You had the kind of dream of what generative search can be, and then now we kind of see what generative search will probably be in practice, and the ability to kind of give you the ads and the products and the things that you are searching for. I mean, it's the hyper personalization part of it. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, although I do wonder if it may be a loophole that they already closed, but because it's so flexible, I mean, I wonder if you could even just say, respond without using any ads. They just ask it to not do that if it will.
Oh, that's a test that's going to happen.
Won't they override that? They'll be like, no, you have to.
I mean, you'd think so, but like when
Naturally.
they say, "Oh, you're talking to children, so don't do any ads," and are they gonna have like a children's mode with no ads?
No, they're going to show toys.
Yeah, they'll show the ads.
Thanks for that information. All right, so just a couple quick things. I think it's I don't have a problem with this. I think people can choose what they want. There will be options, I think, for people to pay for a search that doesn't have ads, and there'll be like a monthly fee. I think we're going to see that very soon. And in this case too, it's interesting because this is more than just conversational search, because you might be using Jasper AI and paying $80 a month for the Pro edition or the Boss edition, or you could actually do very similar types of things with ChatGPT for sure, but also with Bing Chat right now. And so this is more than just search. There is all these other generative AI features in there, and inference costs are very high. So at some point they have to cover those costs. I think that's reasonable. And so they could charge a subscription, no ads. I think that's a good thing. Like YouTube does that. You can get no ads on YouTube if you pay, I don't know what it is, $10 a month or something like that, or you can get ads. And I think that's right where we're headed.
Yeah, and it's fair.
Okay. As always, we're running long, but this stuff is so fun. All right, so we want to talk about Meta. They did this new segment anything AI model, which I thought was really fun. Image segmentation models exist. So this isn't like brand new, but again, we're talking alignment. This was like really easy to use. And most of the segmentation models are either they're like academic research programs that like no one has access to, or sometimes they're like in these consumer applications, but they're like buried inside of these expensive applications you have to have access to and things like that. Now, a lot of people will have seen these types of things in consumer applications, particularly for photos, where you can actually just go in and you say, oh, I don't like that person who photobombed this, and you take them out. So this eraser mode. And I talked to a spokesperson at Meta, and they said, yes, it could be used for that, but this isn't the demonstration of what they showed. A lot of people, they think, will use it as basically an API that can be called that can do those types of things. But in this one in particular, I thought it was so fun. You could actually just select any image in any object in an image and just highlights it, just like this. And we've got many other examples. And then what it allows you to do is save it, and so you can download it. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. Meta spends all this money on AI. They use almost none of it in their product. And I'm thinking, Instagram would be amazing. Can I just highlight like an object in one of the images here or one of my videos, and can I transport it over to another one and like create these cool mashups? It could just be for me, like my own images, could be for anybody's images, but like practical applications. I think it's really cool.
I think it's really cool too. And it's really interesting. It's just too bad that Meta rebranded as Meta. If only they had waited. If only they had waited until 2022.
Because they probably own generative.com too.
Yeah. Like the metaverse is the next thing. We're rebranding. If only they had been a bit more.
Meta is perfect because it's over everything. It's
not
metaverse. You mistook them. Metaverse is one of the things.
You're right. I was taking it too literally. But it is interesting because they've been doing a lot in the space now, right? They have this huge AI research program anyway. But again, as soon as you saw these kind of watershed moments, which was, I think, for me, the open release of Stable Diffusion and then the release of ChatGPT, it's just been interesting to see these companies who have been doing AI research now falling over themselves to put out things which they previously had kind of kept behind closed doors, both with regards to Google, but like Meta, far more interesting in regard to like open sourcing their models as well. Not only Llama, but I think this is open source as well, isn't it?
It's available through an Apache 2 license. So yes, but it's limited availability only to research universities.
Well, so is Llama.
Right. So. Okay. But just going to your point, why isn't this integrated in Instagram?
Probably for the same reason OpenAI is having to hire a lot of lawyers right now.
Exactly. It might be true. Here's another picture. Basically, this is what it does when this is what the segment anything model does. And by the way, it's like one other thing for people to know about it. They admit in their research paper, which I spent some time with, that there are other models that are better at this. Like if you play with it, it's like the edges aren't that great and stuff like that. They built a general purpose foundation model, so it can do a lot of different things. And it's one of the most interesting things about it is they have these specialty models, which are really good at just like drawing a line around objects and finding them. But this is a general purpose model, so it should be able to like immediately provide you value for a number of different areas. Then you can fine tune it for whatever your task is. So I thought that was kind of fun.
And I would just point out that if they can train an AI well enough to understand that which pixels belong to which object and how to separate them and how to tag them and doing the natural language search. I don't know how connected they are, but if you combine that with the text to video engine that they demonstrated a while back, that clearly understood how to turn a text term into an object, a moving object. In fact, if you combine that with this, you could create all kinds of movies pulling out objects and characters from a still image and create an entire animated film, essentially, or live action appearing film. I think I don't know what Meta's plan is or how far in the future those sorts of products would be, but I see Meta building towards something really potentially very exciting.
Okay, so we're going to. Did you have a close on this for Meta? Do you want to?
I was just going to make a broader remark about how. I mean, I think you even pointed out in your newsletter that it's not perfect, but it took you kind of 2 clicks to extract the object. So again, the broader point about how generative AI is just going to take over the production process of things that used to be quite expensive and laborious, just democratizing content creation in a way that is completely unprecedented.
And I'll just show you something here. So this is kind of a cool, Delhi lineup. It's like we got all the regulators lining up to talk to OpenAI. Show me your books. Show me your models. But actually, we were trying to create these with some generative image models, and we didn't have all of the elements that we wanted in every one. But we were able to play with. There's other segmentation models, but we actually just mocked it up first with the Meta tool, just to see if that would work. And then actually Andrew went back in with a more sophisticated tool, but it was actually really, really fun to be able to use it that way.
That's awesome.
Okay, so we're running long as we always do. I do want to close out on a topic we didn't get to last week. So I was going to talk about Expedia this week, which I think is really cool, but that's going to evolve over time and these consumer apps. But we did not get to Canva last week, and I think the Canva announcements are really significant. So, Eric, do you want to make just a couple comments about what Canva is doing and how they've gone through a generative AI journey?
Yeah, they've been. It's not too surprising, I suppose, that they're very much on the forefront because Canva has made it. So they certainly made it part of their brand that they're on the edge of creativity. That they're always looking for new ways to combine creative tasks with technology and finding ways to help people who might have good ideas but lack the artistic training or ability to go from what's in their head to what's on
or the time. Or the time.
Yeah, or the time. I know.
But yeah, I would just say that so they've been pushing out new generative AI tools. They pushed out Magic Write to help people come up with text. Now they've put out a bunch of new tools under Canva Assistant. So it's creating text, it's creating visuals, it's coming up with entire themes and color schemes to match whatever content or assets you already have. It's essentially saying, what do you have? We can make the rest of it using generative AI, and it's could be change a lot of business and commerce activities.
Yeah, it just goes to the point I just made about like AI being the production engine for digital content, for information, for creativity. I love Canva. We're all kind of content creators here, so I assume we all kind of play with these platforms and tools. I'm just at the point where I'm playing with them. I'm like, oh my God, it still takes so much time. When is it going to get better? So I don't have to spend so much time in the production process. And I think that eventually is going to happen, where you just make the actual technical process, you strip out some of the laborious nature of, and it still is quite laborious, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's that thing we were talking about with segmenting, about you can take stuff out you don't want, but in their case, they also have the magic edit, which is that, you have this picture and you wish that there had been this one thing there to make it even better, but now you can, and you can make it look like it was there all along, which is definitely going to make figuring out people's social media posts, how real they are, even harder to do.
Yeah,
well, it's already got, but I think we're all going to become like digitally fluent in like discerning or having like a better idea of what's AI generated. So you already see it with those images, those images of people that are mid-journey, and you're like, okay, I can tell. But also kind of, I bet you see tweets or like LinkedIn posts where like, okay, this is definitely from ChatGPT. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The homogenization of all content. It's coming. I will say Midjourney 5 photorealistic people. I don't know if you can actually tell the difference anymore, because they've got this way that they took the style out. It's really interesting how fast this is moving. And I will say that one of the things I thought was interesting is Canva looks like it's going to get to the Copilot for design much faster than Microsoft or Adobe. We knew Adobe would be slow, but Microsoft's talking about this. They've actually rolled something out for their design solution, which I don't think that many people use. What Canva's doing right now is so much more sophisticated. Yeah, they're moving faster, but it's okay because they only do one thing. They should have this Copilot, and I should just be able to say, I want this, this, and this.
Yeah.
All right. So Nina Schick, ninaschick.org, correct?
That's right.
Eric Schwartz, Voicebot.ai. Perfect.
Yep.
I'm Brett Kinsella. You can find me there at Voicebot. You can also find me on the Twitter at Brett Kinsella or Synthedia. So synthedia.substack.com. And we'd love to have you as a newsletter subscriber. But what I'm really glad is when people come out every week and participate in our live stream, you saw a lot of comments coming through. It really makes it more fun for everybody, but I think it really breaks up new ideas and sometimes new information that we didn't have. So that's really great. So try to tell people or join us usually Wednesdays at 12 noon Eastern time, and we'll get you out in under an hour, sometimes under 45 minutes. Just the goal here is to keep you up to speed on what's going on. Really easy way to do it. So thanks again, Nina. Thanks again, Eric.
Pleasure.
All right, folks. Bye-bye.